My guest today is Adrian Pocobelli, who has an amazing show on YouTube called Artist Journal, where he dives deep into digital art and artists. He also hosts this show as a Spaces for Rug Radio, the iconic Web3 native media brand. His journey as an artist began on an iPhone 6S, on apps he still uses today. In this episode, we dive deep into the differences between art culture in North America and Berlin, and go on many other tangents inside and outside Web3. Adrian is just the type of person we need in Web3 for it to truly thrive. LFG, baby. Let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Adrian.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to talk to you.
Yeah, I've been pretty excited about this. One, since you were first introduced to me, and two, since we've talked. A very, very good friend of mine. In fact, the man I credit with sending me down the rabbit hole that is Web3, Joshua Sobel, also known as Aw Heck, had been watching your show and just found it absolutely fascinating. And he's like, you need to connect with this guy. And I started watching your show and I was like, I need to connect with this guy.
That's really awesome to hear that kind of feedback, because it really is just unvarnished. Like, here we go, we jump off the cliff and people can either like it or not like it. And this is just what it's going to be. So anyways, it's always great to get a positive response from people. It's totally awesome.
Yeah, I mean, just that like kind of style of just consistently speaking for, a long period of time is, I think, hard for a lot of people, and to stay optimistic, and just really bring about like some amazing commentary on this art in real time, just seeing you work, shuffle through your tabs. And I find it fascinating. It's a unique way to do things.
It's kind of a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of things, like the tabs really... That is the preparation, and then I can then it's all the reading and everything, all the studying that, it's not like I teach at a university or anything. So it didn't really get used at all. And I hardly talk to anybody, except some of my artist friends once in a while about this stuff. So it was almost just a whole confluence of a whole bunch of things, is how that all turned out. So yeah, anyway, it's hilarious and it's great. So I'm thrilled that people enjoy it. And it's kind of, I don't want to say it's effortless. I mean, it's putting together the tabs. That is the work. But after that, once I hit record, it's actually not a ton of work, because it's kind of like, it's as much work as almost as me talking to you right now,
Yeah. That makes sense. It's like, it's that true stream of consciousness. You're just like going and talking, and it's a powerful thing. I think that's when you get the raw, good commentary out. You get good sound bites and stuff like that. So, and also, as we'll get into it throughout the show, you can tell us a little bit about how you got there. So, the way I usually start these shows is to get someone's founding story. This doesn't have to be Web3, though. Feel free to make it Web3 if you want. I'm looking for like what makes Adrian Adrian. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me try and compress this. So I grew up in the middle of Canada, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Ultimately, I was kind of a weird kid. I went to the real origin story. I went to the Vatican at 6, because Italian family. And so that was kind of a formative, I suspect. I was only 6 years old, so it's not like I was planning it all out. But I think at 6, seeing the Vatican, and I was actually fairly bored going through the Vatican, but I think there was a sense of like, what is this? And that I felt the importance of where I was and how everybody was kind of looking with, patience at all these different images. I think I was kind of mystified by the whole thing in a good way. So then, art was always kind of important. Like, my dad was an artist. He was a physicist. He's retired now, but he was also he called himself a Sunday painter. But he was quite a good painter, actually. His paintings are in his basement, like totally unrecognized and all this sort of thing. And so anyways, long story short, did a master's in English. I started with visual arts. There wasn't enough brain food in, art school at the University of Saskatchewan for me. And so I ended up doing English. And then I did a double degree, and then I did a master's in English. And I got introduced while I was a teenager, I guess, to back up a little bit, to the counterculture, because I worked in a used bookstore. So I got introduced to, William Burroughs, J.G. Ballard, and that whole tradition. It was kind of bookstore culture. I was really into comics. I was a huge collector as a kid, too, of trading cards. I would literally stare at the covers of comics in my room for hours at a time on Saturdays, and then just rearranging them. I'd always be like trying to put them in order. And so, so I was always just totally kind of fascinated really with images and what made a great image in a sense. And so I went to art school, ended up doing a master's in English on the Atrocity exhibition by J.G. Ballard. And I had to convince them to do that. Now it would probably be seen as a really cool thing to do by the professors. At the time, the supervisor, who shall remain nameless, he was like, I told him my idea. He's like, I hate it. But anyway, so I convinced him. I was like, no, I was showing him Salvador Dali books that he had written. And I was like, look at the connection, showing how surrealism really was the conceptual foundation of that novel, that experimental novel, which is a response to Naked Lunch by William Burroughs, I'd argue. Anyways, so then I moved to Montreal for 8 years and really lived in poverty with my girlfriend, taught English, and kind of struggled to do some art, but nothing ever really turned out. Then I moved to Toronto after that for 4 years, and really started seriously painting. I was then like 30, and I was like, okay, like it's now or never. And so I really started seriously painting. And then with the iPhone 6S in 2016, I saw, like on my lunch breaks at the office, I realized I could make art, because the iPhone 6S was the first art phone, in my opinion, where you could start to export images. There were several apps, really good apps that I still use, that even like that they're almost like deprecated, or like nobody really uses a lot of these apps anymore, but they're some of them my favorite apps. And so anyway, so I did that. Then I moved to Berlin a year, like 4 years, 2016. Around that same time, I moved to Berlin, and so I've been here now for 7 years, and it's been great. And I had a few shows. It was great. I had my first real art show like 6 months after getting to Berlin, which was really great experience for me. It was just like a community-run gallery, no big deal, Fata Morgana, but it was still a cool, edgy, underground gallery that people knew about out here, and in Mitte, which is kind of like the fancy neighborhood. So so that's kind of, and then so I've been doing the art thing here. I've had like 5 shows. Well, it's nothing too, it's not like I ever really made it in any sort of serious way in the contemporary art world, but I had shows, which is more than some people out here, so and I've met a lot of artists out here, and, finally, I mean, what you do out here on the weekends is you go to art shows, and I love that. It's fun. It's drink wine and hang out with interesting artists and that sort of thing.
And so you were all over Canada, right? You're kind of finding yourself, it sounds like, as you were traveling to these various cities. I'm interested, did your experience in these cities kind of influence the art that you're creating now?
I would say no. It's funny. Like I tried different cities. I was really trying to make Canada work. I didn't really get, like, the reason I'm in Europe is because I managed to get an Italian passport through my dad, but I didn't really get it till I was like 30, because it was this whole convoluted process, because he had renounced, and I was born after he had renounced his citizenship. So actually my mom had to apply because she married him while he was still Italian, so she could become Italian, and she's super Canadian, and then I could become Italian. So it's one of those kind of weird. So but to answer the question on Canada, it's I really tried to make it work, but it's kind of a tough art scene. Like, I mean, if I had to analyze it in retrospect, I would say there's not enough. There is some success there and stuff, but I don't think there's enough. I mean, Berlin's not that different, but there's not enough. So it's very kind of elbowy, like very competitive and everything. So nobody's really looking. I mean, people do get breaks and people do, quote unquote, make it. But I didn't really have much luck. I really tried. And so Berlin felt like a place where I could just be me and people liked it. It wasn't like, oh, you're the weird guy talking about the weird things, which is what I talk about on the show. But that kind of talk wasn't very appreciated out in the circles that I was in Canada. And that could have been totally my fault and all that sort of thing. But it just never really worked for me. So at least out here, I felt there's a value. Being into culture and being into all these things is valued and prized, and it's not that important in Berlin, like your job. It's more like what are you into, what are you trying to do, and so that was so it was a good fit out here. It's a free place in that respect. A lot of people like that about Berlin, and you forget about it sometimes living here for a while, but when you ever go on vacation, people then, including myself, you remember why you like Berlin so much. Like, it's pretty chill,
Yeah, that's very freeing. Like, I don't know many metropolis cities that I hear of people from that are just less focused on what you do and more focused on what you're interested in. That's like, I wonder where that come from. Have you ever dove deep into figuring out what kind of gave birth to a culture like that? Or have you just loved it and embraced it and stuck around?
Of course, I've analyzed it. Yeah, no, it's sort of like, the way I would sort of assess that is, I think it's because Canada is a fairly young country, for example. And I can't speak, I think actually the US is a little bit different in this regard, but Canada's a fairly young country. So there's not like a several century old tradition of the arts, of it being kind of at the center of the cultural life and this appreciation, and super famous historians going all the way back to ancient Greece. So I think it's a little bit different kind of being on the continent of Europe, because it's understood on a really for centuries, if not millennia, 2 millennia, that ideas are kind of the real currency, and kind of things, it's the real game, so to speak. And I just think that depth just simply, it's just, Canada's just too young, I'd argue, culturally, and nothing against it. It was a great place to grow up and everything. But if you ask me to analyze why that is, so I think it's in that respect. So it creates a different kind of cultural values. Whereas in Canada, maybe it was more important, to frankly, like, make a lot of money. And, that's your status. The way that status is measured is a lot different, in a city like Berlin and, compared to, say, Toronto. It's just,
So it's interesting. So it's really like a different model of success, of status within social circles. Whereas if you can have deeper conversations about the arts or about things that you are interested in, you tend to have a wider group of supporters and friends in Berlin. Whereas if you're in Toronto, it's like, yeah, but like, how much money are you making?
Not so directly, but yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Keeping up with the Joneses. I could say at least in Atlanta, it's much of the same. I think there's some very cool cultural history in the city of Atlanta that leads to some very interesting artistic communities. But for the most part, if you go to like the suburbs, it is, what car are you driving? What circle are you doing? What have you done with your career? It's not, hey, do you make art on the weekends, right? Do you want to go to shows? I struggle to find people to go to galleries with me. I really do. I have to make new friends.
It's true. It's kind of like a big unspoken story, I would argue, actually, is it can be quite difficult to actually find, friends sometimes in some of these North American cities. And it wasn't easy. And I'm a pretty social person. So here it's it's much more effortless for me. And, it's kind of an interesting you could have a whole anecdotal cultural discussion on the differences between the two cultures. Big picture, I would say it's just, there's more of an like a lot of the people that I know would be considered, quote unquote losers, who I like a lot and respect, but in North American culture, they'd be like, well, this person is unemployed and they don't do anything, and he wears crazy glasses and he goes to all the art shows and drinks drinks the free wine. I think it's hilarious, and I see, but like that person might not be at all respected and probably won't do very well in a city like Toronto,
Yeah.
But,
I guess, for some reason, this is what pops in my head. A socialite in North America is someone who's rich and influences people and everybody wants to be around him. Whereas a socialite, it sounds like in Berlin, is just someone who is really cool to be around because they can have really interesting conversations, and it has nothing to do with the material things that they bring to the conversation.
Yeah, just to illustrate the point, like I have a friend. I don't think he'd mind me mentioning his name. His name is Christopher Winter, and he's an artist, and he's doing quite well. Has occasionally his paintings are at Sotheby's, whatever. And he kind of blew up in 2007, 2008. He's had a ton of articles. He showed me once his portfolio of articles. Anyways, he blew up in around 2007, 2008, and he bought a sports car in Berlin. He bought an apartment. And him having a sports car in Berlin, especially back then, he was like, it was totally humiliating. Like, I mean, nobody thought you were cool back then. You were like the douchey guy in the sports car. So that's Berlin, right? It's not very materialistic, and it kind of like can be to a fault, but anyway, like people don't dress up here. If I was to go to the bar in a blazer, for instance, like I would stand out unless it was like a really fancy place. And it'd be like, there's the loser with the blazer, not joking. Nobody wears a suit in Berlin. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. You will see suits here and there, older guys, but if I was walking around in a suit, I would just be attracting trouble, if anything.
That is so interesting.
It's pretty funny.
It is. It's like mind bending to learn the different types of cultures. Like you get so set in the culture you're in, you just kind of accept it as true, right? Like you're just like, all right, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go to the birthday parties. We're going to think this thing. We're not going to go to, galleries. Like I'm gonna have to go out of the way. Like I was at, just like little anecdotal thing, I was at Shabbat dinner. I go to Shabbat dinner every Friday, and I was like, hey guys, there's the gallery that's doing a sick opening, and I'm like, no, we're good. Everybody's like, you go check it out for us and let us know. And so I went by myself. It's just that is the life.
It's it's funny. And I'd even just add to the point, like it's trickier to go to galleries by yourself, I found in Toronto, just because like now I kind of been in Berlin long enough where I'm probably going to know someone if it's a bigger opening, or I can check the Twitter, see where certain people are, or on Instagram, see where people are and kind of catch up with them, so it's a lot I can totally go out by myself, and most of the time, and even if I'm by myself, I almost found it an easier thing. I remember going to LA to art openings by myself, and it's just like, I didn't meet anybody. I tried, but it wasn't very easy.
Oh God, definitely not LA.
You
aren't in our group, sir.
I guess, so it's all, I learned the hard way on everything, and including that,
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, since the show is called Web3 with me, we're going to stop talking about culture now. We're talking about a different culture now. So let's fast forward a little bit. You've been in Berlin now for 7 years. What exactly are you doing there? What exactly is your show about, and all your other participation in the space and in art now?
So I've been here for 6.5 years. I have my side gig like everybody else to bring in money. And other than that, I work on my digital art. And I started this show, the YouTube show, about 8 or 9 months ago, let's say, last August. And I kind of had the time to do it, actually. Like it kind of cut into my art making time. But it was an idea that I always kind of had. So I started doing that, and I could afford to do it in a sense from a time perspective. And so, other than that, again, I've been doing shows here and there. They didn't really amount to anything, but it was nice to get that experience. It's something that never happened to me in Canada, and where I got the experience of the production side of putting on an art show. And now I'm not excited about doing an art show, and I'd really have to think about it if someone offered it to me, because it's actually a lot of work and it's really expensive, and you're probably not going to sell anything. And so I have to now weigh that, like, oh, well, if I make something digitally, I can probably sell a few editions on Tezos. And, it really has to be, thought through. I still want to do physical shows, but it's, I learned a lot from that. And so, so now I go to shows, I hang out with people, I do my show, my little YouTube show, and do the Twitter Spaces on Wednesday. And that's kind of my life right now. And then I make art in the rest of the time and hang out with my girlfriend,
Yeah, that's nice, man. It's nice. So what was it that actually introduced you to Web3 or digital art scene? How did you start to learn about it?
Yeah, so that was kind of a weird story. I've always been, I guess, since 2010, I've been pretty obsessed with finance, almost since like the 2008 crisis. But I started listening to these really paranoid gold podcasts in 2009.
Nice.
And then I ended up subscribing to a newsletter in the Dines Letter, which is a super famous kind of financial newsletter. There's a whole newsletter writing culture, and I really got into that. And anyway, so that I started getting into finance back then. And so it was actually, so I discovered crypto. Actually, I'd heard about it for the longest time. Like many people, I didn't really buy into it. I should have, obviously, but I didn't really buy into it until like 2020. I think it was the summer of 2020 when all of a sudden Real Vision was putting out all these videos on how Raoul Pal was out there and Bitcoin and Ethereum are going to make you rich. And I was starting to take it pretty seriously. And then I saw James Dines, who's passed away now. He's like 90 years old. And then I heard an interview with him in August 2020 saying, Bitcoin and Ethereum, this is the thing to get. And so that's when I became convinced. I was like, I have to figure out how this works like tonight. And so I did. So that's kind of how I got into it. So it's actually through finance that I got.
Were you reading the white papers at that point?
No. And even still, like, I never finished the Bitcoin white paper. You said white paper, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I know. And I still haven't finished it. Actually, it's kind of complicated in the two general problem. Like, I should give that another shot. But no. But it's interesting though. I'd seen Super Rare in like 2018 because I was making digital art on my phone a lot at that point.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand it. And all I saw was that you had to apply. And I was sort of like so dejected from my experience in Canada that I just felt like I'll never get in anyway. So anyways, 2020, I got into crypto and I was like, okay, the world's about to jump onto this bandwagon. I need to apply to Super Rare while I can here because it's going to be, and so I applied and then I managed to get in, actually, luckily. So in March 2021, is when I was starting to mint, I minted my first NFT. I didn't really buy one though till that October. So I didn't even really understand the business I was in, and then I bought an art NFT in October of 2021. And that's when I understood, when the artist was so happy and was, giving me the message on Twitter, thank you, and then retweeting. And I was just like, this is really, really cool. And that's when I started to that's when it clicked. But I was literally selling NFTs before I even really understood what it was all about. I actually thought, like, I can't believe people are giving me money for JPEGs. That's like, I was like, $300. There you go. No problem. So,
I don't think there's many people that were that, like, I guess, I don't want to say naive, but just
clued out. Yeah,
clued out.
Totally. I was completely, and like there I was on Super Rare, but had no idea. Like, I thought it was just like a flash in the pan sort of thing, and I sold things for way too cheap. In retrospect.
In retrospect, in March 2021, you could have sold it for God knows how much.
Oh yeah, and it's great. Like I still luckily by the October, November, I was selling for thousands. Like, I mean, my highest sales ever. It was like $5,000 or $6,000. I did a couple of times, so I came around. But yeah, like those first works, and I put some of my nicest works. I sold for nothing. But that's fine.
So you didn't realize that kind of like alignment that a lot of us, myself included, saw until you bought the NFT, which is like, hey, I got a direct connection with this artist now. It isn't some art I found in a gallery that I may never go back to again. I may never see this person again. Like now I can just talk to them whenever I feel like it. And in fact, there's a lot of value in me talking to them because if they resell it, I can actually reserve royalties on it, which now is obviously a bit of a debate, but for the most part, at that point was not. How did that change how you were interacting with your collectors? Were you a bit more active after that point, or how did you talk to them?
That's a really interesting point. I mean, to Super Rare's credit, when they onboard you, they kind of clue you in to the degree that I didn't even realize this. They're like, most of the collectors of NFTs are on Twitter, and I didn't even really realize that, right? So,
crypto Twitter, baby.
yeah. So, and sorry, what was the question again?
It's just like, like you didn't see like the real
Right.
value of selling digital
Right.
art until you actually bought one and had the artist like retweet it and say all that. Like, did that change the way that you interacted with your collectors?
Yeah, so I became much more active on Twitter. Although, like, again, it's sort of like, and I can only blame myself. Like, I take full responsibility. My Twitter didn't really have any traction. Like, it's interesting. I didn't, like, I'd get like one like if I posted stuff, and I think a lot of people are there and don't know how to kind of. Twitter's a real kind of, you got to kind of swim in Twitter for a while before you start to get a feel. And then you got to try stuff out. It's a real art to doing Twitter. And so I would do stuff, but it was not until I started doing video that my Twitter started to get some traction and that people, so I had to find my medium because I felt like me pontificating on Twitter, it was just like, who's this jerk? I think was what most people were thinking. Like, what does this guy think who does this person think he is? Like me and my
If
opinions.
they saw it. If
they even saw it, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe you'd get a charity like or two from that person that you kind of know, so. So anyway, so you kind of got to find your medium, and so for video kind of did that for me, and it's something I wanted to do for a very long time. And it's funny, like Twitter is very lo-fi. It's a very lo-fi medium. I mean, it's like a little bit of text. You can put image, but often it's just a little bit of text. So, and it can be interpreted so many different ways. And as we all know from, our personal relationships, like there's no quicker way for a conversation to kind of go down than through text, and the misunderstandings that happen and all the tone. So it's extremely lo-fi. So yeah, but to your point, I started to, manage that side of things. And even still, I could still manage it better and do more to kind of really, I say thank you out there, but I don't tag everybody. But I don't know if I want to be tagged every time I buy something either. So there's an art to it, and you want to be discreet, but not, you got to get a balance. But yeah, I manage it a lot. I'm conscious of it because and you have to show, in a sense, there's a protocol, and you have to kind of fit within that protocol. Otherwise, you're screwing up, like I did at the beginning, where I wouldn't be, like there's a good protocol that I see is when, if someone makes an offer, say on Super Rare, then you say, thank you for the offer. I'm going to wait a day. And if nobody else takes it, I'm going to go with it. Like this sort of stuff, just good communication. Yeah. And I wouldn't do anything. Someone would have left an offer and then I'd just let it hang for a week, and then that offer would be taken back, which is a brutal experience.
Yeah. Because they can put a time limit on it, right?
Yeah, and they can just like rescind the offer, and then then all the other offers below that get kind of canceled. So it can be, that's a pretty devastating thing to happen. So now I think the more the model is the 24-hour auction once the reserve gets hit, and I like that model way more than this waiting for offers, and then you have to manage that. Well, it's a lot less to manage with the artists. So I actually really like for the on Ethereum this 24-hour auction idea.
Yeah, the time constraints kind of put in like a bias towards action for anybody that's interested in it. And then there's also, like following on like kind of like the cultural norm there is like, if someone gives you an offer, even during that 24 hours, a lot of artists will be like, thanks so-and-so for the offer on Twitter. And it serves two purposes. One, it gives that person recognition so they feel good about themselves, but also it lets people know, hey, people are interested in my work. And this auction has so long to go. You may want to check it out too. Right.
Well, exactly. Social proof, right? It shows
Social
like
proof.
that person's willing to spend money on my art. Maybe you should consider spending money on my art as well. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So it's like some people are masters of this, and sometimes they're like 23 years old,
Yes.
like, and they're like total masters of like managing the business side of it, so yeah, there's a lot to be said for that.
It's just, yeah, I mean, I find that interesting, kind of the age dichotomy of the space, right? Like you've got like these people that are digitally native. I do not fall into that camp necessarily. I'm 36. So like I obviously was around when like there was no internet. I was pretty young, but like I am not native to social media. So when people give me kind of like these abstractions about, what the social media like pulse is and all that, I'm like, how do you see this stuff? Like, because I just don't spend hours inside of there. In fact, I purposefully do not spend hours inside of there, which, to the behest of my viewers and my show, maybe. But it is interesting. One of the things that I kind of took away from this, and you can kind of give me your thoughts on this, is I actually purposefully made friends and then mentors from the generation below me. I would find someone who's in Gen Z in their early 20s that I would connect with through an NFT community or something like that. And I'd build a friendship there. And it helped me kind of get in their shoes of like, how do you think about this? Because like for me, it just seems obnoxious a lot of the time, to be frank. But I don't know if you've had a similar experience with the kind of like age issue.
I've always found it kind of refreshing. I mean, I'm 44, and so it's always been really. For me, it's a great way to just connect. In a weird way, I haven't had too many problems. Like I kind of relate a lot with kids. Like I'm kind of always. I probably spend too much time on my phone and too much time online. Like I was thinking my girlfriend's sister has a kid who's 17, totally related to these kids, hilariously. But there are other things that like a lot of cultural references I won't know. And I don't watch a ton of movies, and like a lot of like hip hop stuff, I won't have a clue. But overall, like in a weird way, I'd say it kind of keeps you young at the same time, especially being on Object and seeing on Tezos, not just young, but people from all over the world,
right?
Like you'll get like a 17-year-old from Argentina, that's minting, or from Turkey or wherever, Indonesia.
Yep. It does not matter where. There are no geographical boundaries.
Yeah. So like it keeps things, I feel very, weirdly connected. Like I'm still trying to wrap my mind around what it means when I can have a Twitter space and you have someone from, Poland, Uruguay, Indonesia, and, Nigeria, literally, on your call, like live. I mean, this is incredible,
And it makes for unreal conversations and discoverability. I mean, we started this show on a rant about the difference of culture between North America and Europe, right? For the most part, like, imagine when the whole world is included. What kind of value does that bring? What kind of like different interests does that bring? What kind of commentary and opinions does it bring? It opens up. I mean, I think that's a lot of why, at least I'm here. I can't speak for you. Is like, you've now like given people the ammo they need to have a creative renaissance, right? Again, and it's just digital this time. And like, what is that going to produce? I don't know. But I'm definitely here for the ride.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I mean, it's this whole idea. I mean, it's an exciting topic, like of gatekeepers, right? Like nobody is in your way as far as minting on Object, or, back to Tezos, like Ethereum. Okay. You got to have some money. You got to, Foundation you can get into without an invite. So that's cool. And that's a credible, digital art platform on Ethereum. So there is that option. But it still costs you, what can be a lot of money in certain parts of the world. Even in, as someone was saying just the other day, it shouldn't cost like the cost of a tank of gas to mint a NFT, which even in, Germany or Canada or US, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about the person in Argentina? So yeah, but to your point, like I think what we're seeing here in this scene, and part of what makes it so exciting is the gatekeeping has been lifted, and now it's anybody who's willing to take the initiative
Yeah.
can have their work, on the market, on a free market, and just like where maybe it sells, maybe it doesn't, maybe you get on Twitter, you sell a little more, you can hustle a little bit, but really where you can actually get a very quick response. And you can adjust right away if all of a sudden you go, listen, none of my art's selling. Maybe I want to try a different kind of series. It's very forgiving, the space, in terms of, it's a double-edged sword, actually, because it's sort of like there's kind of a recency bias where it's like sort of, it cares most about what you've done most recently.
Right.
Let's say, so if you put out a whole bunch of masterpieces, then you put out 2 or 3 works that suck, then you kind of suck at that moment. But the beauty of it is vice versa. If you put out some maybe mediocre work or work that you're not thrilled about, that you wish you were better, but then you really improve, the space will forget like immediately what you had done. And if you go, wow, look at this work that you've done, there's a bit more of a bias towards the work itself, I'd argue, than the artist. Compared to the contemporary art world, which is really interesting. Back to this kind of, I think it's the free marketedness of the whole thing, because there's a lot of speculators in crypto, and I think that might actually help the scene, oddly.
That's interesting. So like with this recency bias, like it's less about your resume and more about what are you doing now, right? What is the narrative that's driving your current series or this current artwork that you just released? Is that something that, one, I resonate with as a person, but also something that like the community will resonate with because there are speculators? Is this something that I may be able to resell at some point for more than I bought it for?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're more likely to get people buying your work. I mean, it's pretty hard going to sell physical artwork because, I mean, you really have to assume if you're buying from an artist that's not very well known, that's not kind of in the main circuit of contemporary art, you have to assume you're never going to get your money back. Especially if you're not a name as a collector. Maybe if you're Saatchi and you go out and buy a whole bunch of work, well, then it becomes valuable instantly because you're a big enough collector. But for most people, they're really buying for themselves, and almost all the sales I made of physical art were almost always someone who had some kind of connection to the art, whether you're displaying something that they kind of, had some sort of sense, whether you're, showing a character that they had already known from a movie, so therefore they liked it, or they know you as an artist and they go, okay, this is someone I know. So really someone that people want to relate to the work. I made a sale of a painting to Canada. It was someone that I grew up with, really, but that was a nice big sale of, and but people want a bit of a story. Where in contemporary art, whereas in digital art, it's a bit more like what the liquidity. I mean, that's another way of putting it. You have tons of liquidity.
Yeah.
Like, people will buy your work as an artist and they'll add 4 Tezos and put it right back up for sale. Yep. And they'll often sell it.
Yep.
I mean, that's amazing. The liquidity is like, and people complain about the flippers, and I get it, but it's like, that's amazing.
It's a part of the cult. Like you can complain about it all you want. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah. And like, I mean, we have the positive side of it is like, if you need to sell your art, it's nothing like contemporary art. You know what I mean? Like it's, unless you're not, if you're in the very top tier blue chip galleries, that's a different story. Okay. It's almost like I heard the story about these Hermes bags. Like you have to be on a list just to spend $100,000 on these purses. You're not even allowed, like you're not on the list. You can't buy this. And you only get like 2 per year is what I heard. So it's the same with paintings.
Think about like allow lists when things were booming, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make you sit in Discord for hours trying to earn a level so that you have the right to give me couple hundred, maybe more than $1,000 for this digital picture.
That was the craziest. I think that was probably the craziest speculative mania of all time. Like, I think we put the tulip bubble to shame in 2021. Like, that was hardcore. And like, I mean, yeah. So a lot of people, like, I'm way better off than I was when I started that bull market, despite the massive bear, and it's not like I'm doing fabulously, but I'm doing all, like, that was a great, like, yeah, like, it was historic.
What about mentally? How has your mindset changed since that point in time?
Well, it's kind of funny. Have you ever heard the term crypto hippie?
No.
Like, it's sort of like once you go crypto, it's like a certain lifestyle and mindset. And there's almost like pre-crypto me and there's like post-crypto me, like, and I've never really gone back. It's sort of like you can't unsee it, or it's sort of like, it's like a part of my life now in a weird sort of way. So it definitely has actually affected my mindset, because now I see an opportunity for just digital markets, so to speak, whether it's me selling my art or speculating. It's a lot. People sometimes dismiss the accessibility of crypto. Like, if I have MetaMask and a little bit of Ethereum and basically a Binance account, I can basically buy, sell, and trade, do whatever I want until I have no money left, if you know what I'm saying. Like, yeah. I mean,
you have complete control over it.
Complete control. I mean, and I guess it's the same if you have a stock account, right? But it's just, but that barrier, though, of having a stock account, like, for me, I finally got one, but it's actually not as simple. And here I am. I'm a fairly, I'm not like, clued out when it comes to finance and business and investing. I've been kind of pretty intensely preoccupied with it. It wasn't easy for me to set up an account. And that's part of my own fault when I moved to Germany and all this sort of thing. But I'm just saying, like, it was so much easier. I had my crypto stuff up in like 2 or 3 days, right?
Yeah, it's no problem. I had the same troubles. I moved my 401k over to a self-directed IRA, and I'm like, how do I use this? Like, this should be like way easier. Why do I have to click all these buttons? Like, I just want to buy the thing.
Yeah,
like crypto, it's like, oh, we made that easy for you. Now on the other side of that, look, that sometimes if you're not native to crypto, it can be quite intimidating, right? The whole user experience behind it. But once you've kind of like earned your stripes and you know how to fund a MetaMask wallet and connect a wallet to a site and you have your browser extension, it's pretty easy.
Then it's just about security, right? Yeah. I mean, Tezos, it's the same thing. Like the Tezos wallet, I use the Kukai wallet. There's I didn't do it for months, Tezos, because like I heard people talking about it.
It was so grungy then. That was back when Hicket Nunn was I assume that's when you got started, right?
I think I set up my first wallet maybe in November. So I think it had actually just shut down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I was pretty, in a sense, late to the whole Tezos scene. I knew about it. I saw artists that were kind of talking about it on Twitter. Kind of had a couple of Twitter friends who helped set me up, and who were like, do this. I use this
Kukai,
wallet.
Get Temple.
Yeah, exactly. Like this one works on the phone better. This one works on the browser better. It's actually pretty straightforward, but I have friends who've been wanting to mint NFTs for a long time, but they just don't bother to put that 6 hours of work, really. You can do it in a day, but you have to be willing to want to know,
And it's pretty intimidating. I mean, frankly, like I'm not an artist by any means, but like I definitely have been in NFTs now for a long time. And the first time you go to mint something, you're like, am I really minting this? It's going on the blockchain. It's going to be there forever. Okay.
Absolutely. I had MetaMask for 2 weeks at least on my phone, and I didn't understand the whole idea that when you hit the browser, you're kind of logged in.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't understand it. Like I was just like, I didn't get it. And then I was like, when I was in the Cubase or Coinbase wallet, and then that's when I realized, I was like, oh, it's like when you're on the browser, you're basically logged in on the phone and this whole thing. But I didn't get it. So
It's
yeah,
not
so
intuitive. It's definitely not intuitive. It's a whole new way of doing things. You're like, do I put my card in here? Like, what do I do?
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I have to ask. There is like a certain like beautiful like kind of vibe that you bring to your personality, and it seems like, having talked to you before the show and watching your show and talking to you now, like it's consistent. There's no like Adrian's acting now when he gets on his show. What is it that helps you do that? Do you have certain like ways that you think about things, or is that just you as a person kind of going out there and doing your thing?
The real answer is that's just raw me. It's
Oh,
raw me. It's because otherwise I don't think I could. Yeah, like because half the time I'm like, I finished the program. Not half the time, but I mean, especially like early on, I'd like finish the show and I'd sort of be like, it was great while it lasted, but nobody's gonna like that, like. But whatever. I was just obsessed on delivering a show, and that was kind of the thing that I was kind of promising myself. Just show up and end of story. So yeah, so it's just me. I mean, I have done a lot of work on myself in terms of like I discovered coaching, which I never took seriously,
mhm.
as a like the whole like what I call what would we call it?
Self-help.
Yeah, like the whole self help and everything. Like I had a relationship that went bad. I was very codependent till like my mid 30s, even later.
Mm.
And so I kind of came to that stuff late, but that changed my life actually. And just like these very, very basic things that they don't really teach you in school, so I think that's also helped, just being positive. And, a lot of people still make the mistake, the positive self-talk. I mean, it's kind of important, right? And
Right.
we've all been there where you can sort of get down on yourself and it's just like a self-defeating proposition. So there's that. And also reading the classics. I mean, I'd say it's especially like the Platonic dialogues do something to your brain, and I did read those. I almost did a master's in Neoplatonism, and that stuff helps a lot too. I mean, some of my favorite speakers were one of my favorite speakers was like, yeah, he was a Platonist, and I don't think that's accidental. And I also did a lot of mushrooms, frankly, in my youth, in my late teens, early 20s. And sometimes I wonder if the way I speak, if that was like, I did a lot. I wanted to be a psychedelic guide, and I was reading a lot of Terence McKenna. So I was doing like all these like heroic doses, like as a kid, which is kind of crazy. Don't recommend that.
Yeah.
But sometimes I wonder if the way I speak was affected by that. I don't know, but
Mm.
I do wonder that once in a while.
You have to like think about that. Like now that stuff's in the spotlight, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It is very much. I mean, I think about it a lot personally. I've participated in my fair share, not heavily, but like it was mostly recreational for a long time. But there is connections that your brain builds while you are on psychedelics that are not possible without them, for the most part. And it can change the way that you function as a human. And I applaud it. I'm glad we're finally embracing that side of culture, because it has been just defeated for so long, because it's been grouped into this category with totally different types of drugs, and especially in the US. But
Yeah.
now you're actually starting to see like the real results of this. I think, one of the books that was very influential for me in that was Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And then the follow-up Netflix series, which I made every single person in my family watch, so that when someone mentions psychedelics, they aren't like, you fucking hippie. This is like really helping people like actually fix what's going on up here. So yeah, I mean, I totally see it.
I didn't even realize there was a Netflix series. But yeah, to your point, I mean, I'll never forget, like, actually, one of the greatest moments of my life was staring in the mirror while I was high and just thinking. And I remember I was just saying, I was like 21, 22. I was just thinking how pathetic I was. Actually, and I was thinking my pathetic soul is what I was thinking to myself. But that moment, though, it was like a transformative moment, because all of a sudden I was looking in the mirror and I realized I could change and that I could script things. And it wasn't just like I wasn't condemned to be this way anymore. And I tell you, my relationship with my parents changed overnight. They probably wondered, what the hell happened to Adrian? Why is he so nice and understanding now? So I kind of grew up in a moment in a weird sort of way. And I still had a ton of growing up to do. But that was, to your point, transformative. All of a sudden I realized my parents weren't these gods that, these tall figures that would, they're limited people like you or me, and they're just doing the best they can,
Yeah. It's a big inflection point. Was there a specific event that led to your self-help inflection point? Like a codependency or a relationship or a book you read or something like that?
I had a relationship which had gone bad. It was kind of classic. And it was because I was totally codependent at 35. So this is much later, maybe later. Almost embarrassed to say, maybe 39. But some people never learn this stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the freaky thing about this. Like, we don't teach what I call practical ethics. We don't teach this, like how to act, so I grew up and I didn't really know how to act. So so that's why I don't blame Canada for my, because I
blame Canada.
right. But it could have been me, like I'm sure it was in a lot of respects, me just not knowing protocol and whatever. So it's kind of a late bloomer in that respect, but again, stuff like if you have problems in relationships, I tell people coaching, and you don't need to get a real coach. Just have audiobooks. Brian Tracy, the original coach in a lot of ways. So anyways,
the reason I was diving into that was kind of selfish. I went through a similar period in my life where it started when I was 25, and I'm still working on it today. Is like, my friend is like, hey, you're a really smart guy, but like, I think you should read this book. And it was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I was just like, whoa, like it just opened my mind to like, oh, you don't just get together with your friends to complain about this and wait on them to do things and get in arguments at like all these really simple things that like, no one ever talked about that in like my household or at school or anything like that. You either just had it or you didn't. And then you start down this whole journey of like these various books. Like one of them was more transformative, and what the most catchy title was The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
And like you start to realize there's just so much more to like a social interaction and the way you build relationships and how much they matter in the world and how little control you have over other people. For a period of time, it was the Four Agreements that kind of guided me. I don't know if you've ever read that.
I'm not familiar with that, no.
More or less, the ones that were really relevant were, don't take anything personal. Anything anybody else says or does is just a reflection of their own reality, right? And like I just found that just like, wow, it just made so much sense. I would like read it every day to remind me, like every time someone says something to you, don't get upset at them and assume they're attacking you like that. It's really transformative and nothing to do with Web3. I'm loving this conversation.
Assume the best, as Brian Tracy. It's just a much easier, less stressful way of being in the world. And, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, I consider that like a timeless treatise on human nature. Yeah. Like, I think it's chapter 1, don't criticize. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's like management 101, like, because you're not going to, criticizing gets you nowhere.
Because everybody will just immediately take that to heart, right?
Yeah, and just like tense up and just like not want to hear anything you're saying after that. It's just you're attacking them.
Never criticize, condemn, or complain. It's like
yeah.
There's actually games you can play with it. Like you can like take like a bracelet and put it on one arm, and every time you complain internally or externally, you have to switch the arms and start over for a certain period of time. And if you really want to drill it down,
well, I know a few people who could use that bracelet. Yeah. Sometimes the Germans out here, they can be. There's a broodiness to it. Like there's a dark kind of melancholy sometimes. Maybe it's the weather.
Yeah. It's
They love to
interesting because
complain.
when you're around someone that maybe doesn't acknowledge that, at first it's kind of funny, right? Like when someone says something like kind of snarky, but then you realize it's everything, and you're like,
Mm.
everything it's just gonna be you complaining again. You're like,
I have a friend actually out here who will remain nameless. Actually, we're friends again. But way back when, he'd just complain about everybody, and it was always somebody else's fault. And finally, I was like, person X, at a certain point, don't you you need to take responsibility for these relationships because you continue to be in these relationships. And so at what point are you responsible? He didn't talk to me. We almost had a physical fist fight later that night. He
wow,
didn't talk to me for like 2 years. And I
2 years.
maybe even longer, but it's like, I saw
Did
him
he?
the other day and I was like, okay, it's water under the bridge. Like, I don't care. We didn't even talk about it and it was good. And that was great. I was glad to see,
That's good. But
but
you
yeah.
want to help people out, though. I think it brings up the point of like, at the end of the day, though, like only people have to want to fix themselves, right? I have plenty of friends, as I've modified my interests and stuff, that have fallen by the wayside because they were in the same place, and they just don't graduate to new meanings and stuff. And so it was like the same conversations on repeat, and you want to see people grow. And I think, kind of relating this back to Web3, I mean, when I got into NFTs, it was because I was extremely stressed, and I was like, what is a good way that I can express myself and who I am that is so much more than, at the time, practicing law at a software company. And no shade to the software company, they treated me great, but it's a demanding job. And I mean, it was like an unlock for me. Like the first time I finished a piece of physical art, it was like, oh my gosh, this is just such an expression of myself. And like, I just didn't give a shit what anybody thought about it. I thought it was cool no matter what. And like, it was almost the first time I was able to do that, right? Like truly do that. And I think that unlock, paired with what we were talking about earlier, which is like almost zero barrier to entry into the NFT space, is like so powerful. It can change the world.
I think, yeah, like I think it's changing the arts, like and especially the visual arts, because it's just made to order. I mean, you have a play, it's okay, that's a different story, or even a movie is a longer thing, but let's say that could happen. But with visual art, it's instant and it's just so easy to do. Like you're basically seeing the real, well, I don't know if that's the right word, but you're seeing an authentic, the art scene, like the authentic art scene of the world, of people that are making art, and you don't have to love it, but it's there, and it's kind of a beautiful thing that I wouldn't know probably 99% of the artists, if not more, that I currently really like and who are some of my favorite artists. I wouldn't know about them.
If it was 50 years
scene.
ago, you'd have to be like in Paris or in a location where they are to have that kind
And then
of
even
thing.
then it would be like this closed circle of 10 people, and do you know the right people, and you're not invited because XYZ and you're too new, or who knows what, right?
Yeah.
So this is nice because, I mean, that's why I like YouTube a lot, because nobody can stop you. Like, I mean, everybody could hate me and I could still just show up and be like, hey, I'm back, and nobody can stop you. Like
I'm
that's kind
back
of
here
beautiful.
talking about digital art, baby.
Yeah, I mean, like I love that. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's great. I know we're nearing the top of the hour. This has been awesome. I mean, definitely like the best tangent that I've ever been on the show.
That's like, I don't know if we talked about anything.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's they're gonna listen to this and be like, where's Web3? They're gonna be like, this is like, but I guarantee you it's interesting, which is pretty awesome, which is something that I knew we would go down, having spoken with you a few times. You're very authentic and I really appreciate it. I do have my closing questions that I usually ask every guest. The first one is, how do you describe Web3?
I describe it as youthful and optimistic.
I love that. Very succinct.
Yeah, youthful and optimistic. I mean, it has all sorts of problems, and in a sense, that's also the downfall, is it's kind of youthful in a negative way sometimes. But overall, it's really trying to build a new world digitally. So ultimately, that's an optimistic thing. And yeah, it's like, again, it's mostly there are people who are older than me and whatever, but there's a lot of kids who are younger, and it's just really fun. And for them, it's even more natural. Like they're digitally native, as you say.
Yeah. Well, people are like, how do you know, like when like Web3 is like made it? And I always tell people, I was like, when you're walking down the street and it's just normal commonplace to start talking about your friend and his latest art drop on Object or this, or you walk into a restaurant and instead of fixtures, you see digital art on the wall and you know who the artist is. That's like the enlightening side of what the space could be. I think if more people grew up and they're just native in it, right? Like these young people that will, be in their 40s one day and having built a whole career, either a separate career and have this on the side as something they're always interested in, or a whole career in the space, which is beautiful. The last question's forward looking. So feel free to have some fun with this one. It's where do you see yourself in the space in 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in the space in 5 to 10 years?
Wow. So 6 to 12 months, I assume I'll be doing the same thing, but maybe hopefully on a slightly bigger scale. I still subscribers continue to flow in. It's going to be interesting. I mean, because it does keep growing, right? Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but overall it keeps growing. So it's fun to just keep showing up. I mean, the biggest challenge as an artist is getting people to look at your work. And this kind of solves that for me. So there's no reason to ever stop doing it, interestingly. So weirdly, in 5 to 10 years, I could see myself still doing this. And yeah, so that kind of boggles the mind of what that could mean, right? If someone is actually going to show up 5 days a week and keep doing this, I mean, I don't know, maybe it gets ignored and forgotten about. Maybe there's some scandal and I disappear. But what happens if I just keep doing this and it keeps growing and growing and growing? It's a hilarious thing to think about. I don't know what that means or what that looks like. But I assume it's good for my art career, quote unquote, it's good for selling work. It's good. And it's fun to see what people are doing. And so I hope it's just, more life in the arts is basically what I hope. And hopefully in a more sustainable, like financially sustainable way in 5 to 10 years, one would hope,
Yeah. I mean, I think you're building connections for people personally. So I really do hope that you're still doing this in 5 to 10 years and the platform's just bigger. At that point, hopefully we own the platforms. That would be nice.
Yeah. Like I think the digital economy is here to stay, right? Yeah. It's like, whether it's a crypto thing, whether it's some other thing, whether it's MasterCard or Visa that we do this on, I don't think that's going to happen, but it's here to stay. And this selling digital goods, it's too much fun.
Yeah.
It's too much fun, right?
Hell of a lot of fun. Hence the background. Mine.
Yeah, exactly.
Fun, baby.
Yeah.
Well, cool. This has been awesome, Adrian. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Zach. It's great to discuss this with you, and I'm available anytime.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.